All right, let's get right into it. If you've been following the ongoing conversation around digital sovereignty, privacy, and basically the whole future of how we interact on the web, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're diving into a comprehensive explainer on the massive UIID version 2.10 update. We are going to unpack what is honestly a monumental paradigm shift in decentralized tech. We're talking about the ability to actually physically hold your digital identity right in your own hands.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's the roadmap for how we're going to unpack this massive update. 1. The UIID framework explained. 2. Meet the .UIID file. 3. Portability and scoped authentication. 4. 4 security feature tiers. And finally, number 5, enterprise scale and hardened SSO.
Starting off with Section 1, the UIID framework explained, decentralized identity for Web 4.
Now, to really grasp this update, you absolutely have to understand its guiding philosophy. Your data, your rules. Period. And look, that isn't just slick marketing copy, all right? It's literally the structural foundation of the entire platform. UIID is built on this absolute premise that you, the user, are the platform administrator of your own life, not just some product being sold to advertisers.
So how do they actually pull that off? Well, UIID relies on a very deliberate two-layer identity architecture. Over on one side, you've got your core ID. You can think of this as the immutable root of who you are. It's permanent, it requires absolute maximum security, and most importantly, it is never shared with third parties. It is strictly for first-party actions. Then, on the other side of things, you have your aliases. These are basically the flexible masks you wear for different contexts. Maybe you have one for a social platform, another one for online shopping, one for gaming, and the beauty is they are completely disposable. If you decide to delete an alias, your connection to that specific service is severed instantly and irrevocably. Meanwhile, your underlying core ID remains perfectly safe and totally untouched.
Backing all of this up is a genuinely passwordless authentication stack. You're proving possession of a credential without ever actually transmitting a secret over the network, thanks to zero-knowledge proofs and WebAuthn. Developers can tap into this using an OAuth 2.0 API that uses really granular scopes, things like core write or alias read private, complete with mandatory multi-factor authentication. It's also worth pointing out that this architecture is so robust, it acts as the single sign-on backbone for Linkspreed's entire Tribe universe of productivity apps.
All right, moving on to Section 2. Let's meet the .UIID file, identity in your hands.
This brings us to the biggest paradigm shift of the update. The .UIID file is a native JSON-structured credential file. Now, why does it matter that it's JSON? Because it means this thing isn't some proprietary, unreadable black box. It's a highly portable, human-inspectable container holding your identity material. You aren't locked into some vendor's secret format. You can quite literally open it up in a text editor, look at it, and understand exactly what data you are holding.
And this is where we get to true sovereignty. You know, a lot of decentralized systems just have you write down a seed phrase on a piece of paper, but UPool gives you a structured digital artifact. Because you physically possess this file, you can store it on an encrypted thumb drive, you can lock it inside a hardware vault, or you could even keep it on a totally air-gapped machine that never touches the internet. In a truly self-sovereign system, holding this file literally means holding your credential. No middlemen, no cloud intermediaries, just you.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, portability and scoped authentication, granular control at the file level. So when you actually go to export your identity, version 2.10 hands you two very distinct modes. Mode 1 is your full identity backup. This takes your entire identity state, your core ID, and all of your associated aliases, and wraps them up into one master file. Mode 2, though, is the per-alias identity export. This creates a file containing exactly one alias and absolutely nothing else. It perfectly extends that core philosophy of compartmentalization right down to your file system. You could hand a developer or put on a specific workstation a file for just one single alias, knowing for a fact that your core ID remains totally isolated.
But here's the real kicker. This isn't just some passive backup archive gathering dust. The .UAE file is an active authentication method. You can now authenticate directly on the UIID login page just by using the file. Developers even have a dedicated API endpoint built specifically to handle file-based authentication. But the absolute best feature here is the strict alias level containment. Think about it. If you use a per-alias file to log in somewhere, and that specific file gets leaked or stolen, it exposes exactly one tiny compartment of your identity. It can never escalate to access your core ID. It effectively eliminates the whole concept of a single point of catastrophic failure. Let's jump to Section 4.
4 security feature tiers. Dialing in your threat model.
Recognizing that file-based credentials aren't going to be right for everyone, version 2.10 doesn't force a rigid philosophy on you. Instead, it gives you a dial with 4 distinct tiers in your settings. First, there's disabled, where .UIID functionality is just fully turned off for maximum lockdown. Next up is data backup only. This lets you export the file for your own archives, but completely prohibits it from being used to authenticate anywhere. Then we have login support, which allows the file to sign you into UIID itself. And finally, application off, which grants full scope authentication for your connected apps. This is such a remarkably mature design choice. It means a journalist working under severe threat, a bank's hyper-strict IT department, and a solo indie developer can all seamlessly express their wildly different security needs just by turning a dial.
And finally, Section 5, Enterprise Scale and Hardened SSO, securing the back end.
The single sign-on verification pipeline just got a massive defense-in-depth upgrade. Your identity is now firmly bound to an immutable user object ID anchor, so even if something like your email address changes, that underlying anchor never shifts. They've also brought in strict JWKS signature validation with 0 permissive fallbacks, along with full CSRF state protection against cross-site request forgery and mandatory password verification before you can link any external accounts. When you stack all these upgrades together, they definitively close the door on classic federated identity attacks like token forgery, flow injection, and unauthorized account takeovers.
Because of all this intense hardening, UIID is perfectly positioned for massive enterprise and government deployments. The platform now actually features custom enterprise pricing models. We're talking options for sovereign cloud infrastructure, which makes sure your data stays strictly within specific legal jurisdictions, and full compliance integration with European eIDAS 2.0 and US NIST standards. Honestly, it turns out that a decoupled identity model, one that completely removes a central honeypot of user secrets just waiting to be hacked, is the absolute perfect structural fit for the public sector and highly regulated industries.
On the administrative side of things, version 2.10 rolls out a much-needed fix, account parity. Previously, the institutional features you got were kind of dependent on whether you picked organization, business, or company when you signed up. Thankfully, that inconsistency is completely gone. You now get identical institutional features across the board. Look, it's an unglamorous update for sure, but it is exactly the kind of structural cleanup that is going to save IT and support teams countless hours of frustration.
Okay, before we wrap this up, I have to share a quick fun fact about this release. Version 2.10 was actually originally announced as version 2.9.3. It was supposed to just be a modest little point release on their roadmap. But then, the engineering team added the .uuid file format. Then came the security tiers. Then the scoped authentication endpoint. And then that massive SSO hardening pass we just talked about. By the time the dust settled, calling this a simple patch would have been totally absurd. The architectural shift was so massive that it literally outgrew its own version number, forcing them to jump straight to version 2.10. Honestly, as far as development problems go, delivering way too much innovation is definitely one of the better ones to have.
And that really brings us to the core takeaway of this whole explainer. UIID version 2.10 takes this lofty concept that your identity belongs to you out of the realm of abstract architecture and turns it into a reality you can back up, carry in your pocket, and control with absolute precision. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. As we move deeper and deeper into the digital age, if you can't hold your digital identity in your own hands, do you really own it? Thank you so much for joining me today to explore this massive leap forward in digital sovereignty. Keep learning, stay focused, and I will catch you in the next explainer.